Make the choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the journey has started. And along the way, be inspired. Listen to the stories by joining the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, on The Journey.
Almost 3 years since COVID-19 compelled Howard University to transition to online learning, we have entered a new phase of the pandemic. We have returned to in-person instruction. We are able to gather safely in large crowds, and masking is optional on our campus. In this new era, where the threat of COVID-19 has diminished, how should we balance practicing caution with returning to the way of life before the pandemic? What lessons from the pandemic should we make sure to carry forward? Hello, my name is Dr. Wayne Frederick, and my guest today on The Journey is Dr. Roger Mitchell, Chair of Pathology at Howard University College of Medicine. Welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Good. So first, let me start with your history here at Howard.
Yeah.
You have a deep history at alma mater.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell our audience about your family's history with the university?
Well, listen, I'm proud to be part of a Howard legacy. My grandfather graduated Howard Medical School in 1932. My grandmother from the nursing school in 36, right? Freedman's Hospital, where we're sitting in right now, is where they met. And so that legacy of my grandfather being a black bag physician and in Atlantic City and delivering babies in kitchens and taking pies and cakes for payment. My grandmother didn't like that. But that's the legacy that I learned about growing up with my grandfather. And then my uncle went here for undergraduate and he became a physician. And then as one of his first grandsons to become a physician, I came to Howard as an undergrad. I was here in the 90s, 92 to 96 as an undergrad, and then went on to med school and so forth and so on, but was able to come back here almost 2 years now to serve alma mater.
And you have a son who's trying to continue the legacy.
Absolutely. I have a son who's a sophomore here at the Chadwick Boseman College of Fine Arts, and he's musical theater. There's actually a performance that's happening right now on campus that he's prop master for, so he's really excited about that. And hope to have my 2 additional young people come. And I'll be remiss if I didn't shout out my wife. I met her in 1992, so 30 years ago, and we've been married for 20. And a great group of friends that have been here too. So
excellent. So you grew up in New Jersey, went to medical school there as well, and did your residency back here in the city of George Washington. Yep. What about pathology interested you when you were in medical school?
You know, it's interesting because my interest in pathology didn't start until right after I left college. It was forensics that brought me in, right? So I was, and this is a good message for our students, I was doing DNA research at the Sickle Cell Center when I was a junior at Howard. And we were taking DNA and looking at DNA and putting plasmid DNA in bacteria, looking for an HIV cure back in 1995. And the O.J. Simpson trial was happening at the same time. And they were talking about forensics and the application of DNA science and forensics. Well, I was doing DNA science in the Sickle Cell Center. So I made a decision not to go straight to med school, but to pursue a career as a forensic scientist. So I got into the FBI as a forensic scientist and was one of the first black men in FBI laboratories. And there I got exposed to forensic pathology. And then I knew what type of doctor I wanted to be. So I left the FBI and went to med school for the purposes of being a forensic pathologist.
Let's talk a little bit about that time at the FBI, because especially today, one of the things that you're certainly known for is trauma prevention.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about your experience at the FBI on that forensic side, because sometimes when we talk about law enforcement agencies, especially in our community, obviously there's some significant concern, and people don't always see African Americans as being welcomed, and I think to some extent there's a stigmatization about us participating in those agencies. What was your experience like?
I mean, it was eye-opening. because that's really where I used to do forensic examinations on items of evidence from violent crime. So sexual assault kits, looking for blood. You know, I was a serologist, so I was looking for blood or semen on items of evidence from violent crime. And there I got to read all of these scenarios of violence that was primarily happening in poor white communities and black and brown communities. And we were identifying these, blood or semen to go on for DNA analysis. I became a serology team leader there, but one of the most significant experiences is that I joined the Employee Assistance Program. And there I served as a resource for officers who had discharged a weapon in the line of duty. During that training, I got trained as in post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD at that time wasn't being applied across the board to anyone that was exposed to violence. It was only just being applied to law enforcement and EMS. Before that, it was called shell shock. Individuals in war having these issues with being able to not control their anger and being traumatized. Now we fast forward now, we know that PTSD and trauma-informed care and trauma and mental health is a big part of how we need to treat our community that's exposed to violence. So while I was at the FBI's exposure made me want to leave the FBI and learn about violence as a public health issue. And that's one of the reasons why I left. If it wasn't for the exposure that I had at the Bureau, I wouldn't be where I am today.
And just to pull on that thread a little further around the issue of violence being a public health issue, obviously today we're living in a society where gun violence in particular is a concern. What are your opinions about the access to guns and just how we are addressing this issue? Is it really a public health issue? And you're part of the task force that I've put together to address this issue and to make recommendations, and I believe that you guys will be sending that to me soon. But what's your take on that spectrum of issues?
Well, we know that gun violence, 117,000 Americans are shot every year. Out of that 117,000, about 40,000 die. A little bit over half of them are suicides. A lot of people don't know that gun violence in this country is a suicide issue, just as much as it's a homicide issue. But in our communities, communities of color and poor communities, homicides due to gun violence is real. It is the #1 killer of black males ages 10 to 35, and is steady, but is preventable. It's preventable because of what we know our own W.E.B. Du Bois said. Access to education, economics, housing, healthcare, and non-disparate criminal justice practices, those will solve most of our issues in healthcare, right? Access, social determinants of health, that I know that you're a proponent of how we approach things. Is the public health approach the approach? Absolutely, right? The public health approach allows us to use more things in our tool bag. It allows us to bring faith organizations to the table, allows us to bring academia, allows us to bring our healthcare providers. We have a phenomenal emergency department, trauma-informed violence interrupter program that is here at Howard University that makes a difference in when individuals come in having sustained some injury due to violence, having a conversation and then wrapping around that individual, that survivor, and then giving them additional opportunities, not just them, but their families. That's the public health approach, right? That doesn't mean that we don't need law enforcement. I'm one of these moderates that believe that law enforcement play a part in our community as long as it's community law enforcement, as long as it's individuals that are in our community, from our community, love our community, and don't see our community as other. Right? It's when law enforcement sees our community as other and have this warrior presence that we run into these issues of police brutality or law enforcement excessive force. Now, as it relates to guns, absolutely. We know that access to cigarettes leads to lung cancer. There'll be a time when you and I will be sitting here at this table smoking a cigarette or a cigar or a pipe, having the same conversation. Now that would be ludicrous because we know the exposure to cigarettes leads to disease that leads to death. Well, the tool used to kill people is the gun. To suggest that we shouldn't study how that exposure to the gun, to suggest that exposure to the gun increases the ability for us to have more violent deaths is a lie, right? We know that exposure to the guns. We've just started studying it though, Doc. We've just had the funding go to the CDC and the NIH. Just was released within the last couple years to be able to study. Not nearly enough, right? So we need more funds surrounding gun violence and how the access to the guns leads to prevention or leads to worse outcomes. And I'll end with this. We know where these guns are coming from. We know that there's porous borders from states like ours, the District of Columbia, that has hard gun laws. But the guns are coming in from Virginia, they're coming in from Pennsylvania, they're coming in from Georgia. The ATF knows where these guns are coming from, and we know the manufacturers. We just have to keep people accountable.
And I think along those lines, because this is, I think, such a very germane issue to current day society, and it also is very politically charged,
Sure.
as was the anti-tobacco issue. And I think if you look at that now, we sell cigarettes with big warning labels
That's
on
right.
them. Smoking is down to probably the lowest it's ever been in a society where you have access to cigarettes. And so when you look at that and you think about gun and accessibility and the fact that you have so many states with different laws, how do you see either the public legislation or academics or any other part of the community really influencing that change?
Well, I think that one of the big things is that this is uniquely a federal issue. It's uniquely a federal issue because states have different laws as it relates to gun ownership and where guns are allowed in people's homes and how to own the guns. Obviously, our Constitution allows us to own guns. And so it's uniquely a federal issue, but the states have the ability to control how those licenses are offered. So at the National Medical Association, where I'm the Speaker of the House of Delegates, we've set out a position and have suggested that individuals younger than 18 years old should not be able to walk into a gun shop and buy a gun. Right? We should have issues with that. And so that ownership of a gun should be measured. We said that gun show loopholes should be put in place, should be closed. These gun show loopholes that need to be closed are allowing for individuals to come in and buy a cache of weapons and ammunition. And then with very minimal identification. And then a lot of those guns that are bought legally find themselves in the illegal market. Those are the types of things that states and state legislators can engage in to decrease the accessibility of guns. And then quite frankly, I'm a proponent of there's a carve out to allow for gun manufacturers not to be liable when one of their weapons is used in a mass fatality or mass shooting or even our day-to-day shootings that happen in our community. That's something that gives cover, where if that cover is released, there'll be a lot different types of access to guns in this country.
Right, and you know, as you said earlier, I think there's so many hotbeds on this issue, and getting people to come to the table to compromise, to recognize, you know, where we are. But it starts again with one fundamental issue, is that, you know, we have a constitution that's well over 200 years old, going on 250 plus.
Yeah.
And there are people who believe it should stay in the original format that it was written, regardless of what the society has evolved. I mean, you look at what guns were then.
Exactly.
What they are now, they're very different now. You have semi-automatic weapons, et cetera, that are making it to the streets. And so, you know, that it's going to be an ongoing debate, without a doubt.
There's no doubt about it.
So let's talk a little bit about COVID.
Sure.
And I also want to talk about kind of the future of pathology. So with COVID first, the president has declared that the pandemic is over. And he did so fairly forcefully. I have to admit I'm probably in the camp of it's in a different phase, a phase where we could be probably a little more comfortable with resuming some activities. But what's your thought about the pandemic being over?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're entering a phase where COVID is endemic, right? We're going to have to live alongside COVID in a way that that we have to respect it and respect how we get it as a contagion. But it is from the standpoint, I think, where he's coming from, and I won't put words in his mouth, but from where I'm coming from, it's absolutely not as fatal. We don't have as many serious and fatal outcomes for unsuspected individuals. And I think that's kind of where we are. And the policies that you've described in your opening about, us not requiring testing and making masks optional, signals that even today, since we've done that here at Howard University, we've had no serious hospitalizations secondary to COVID, and we're monitoring that. Right now, we have about 200 individuals that are coming to test. Still, anywhere from 100 to 200 individuals that are coming to test every day. And that is down from, several thousand that we were testing every day when we were making it mandatory, even though that wasn't all the students and faculty coming. But as of last week, we only had 4% positivity. And that's important to note because in a optional testing environment where you test where you feel symptomatic, or you test where you might be going somewhere and you know you have access to a free test, that's a biased sample.
Absolutely.
That's a sample that says, I'm coughing, let me go get a test, or let me go get a test.
Or I've been exposed to someone.
Exactly, and let me get a test.
Higher risk population.
Higher risk population, and it's still only 4%. And that was this week, last week, and the week before we were at about 8%, right? So we're seeing that trend, and I say that not that we can rely on that as a true trend because of the biased population that's coming in to get tested, but I can say that it is an example of where we are now compared to where we were when we were at 12, 15%, and we had thousands of people that were testing, and they were unsuspecting.
And I think the other issue here too is we have a fully vaccinated population for the most part. And I think that's important. How much resistance are we still seeing in the community, in our community in particular, to vaccination, even including getting boosters?
The literature is kind of clear. Like as the African American community, we're a masked community, probably more than most. We were at a conference yesterday, and the White House representative talked about the African American community being more willing to mask. And that is really the call. We still should be masking. Masking in environments where we feel at risk. If we're an at-risk individual, we should be masking. If we're going into environments where we don't know the status of individuals, we should be still masking. That's what mask optional means. It doesn't mean non-masking. It means masking when most appropriate. And then the vaccination, I think that there's a higher uptake in our community of the vaccination than in other communities. I mean, there's still resistance to vaccination, but that resistance is often amongst individuals that are extremely healthy and don't access health care in general versus individuals that access health care and or have some of the comorbidities. But the message is still clear. We want everyone to be vaccinated. Whether you're on Howard's campus or whether you're in Washington, D.C., or whether you're in this larger diaspora, you have access to vaccinations. And right now we have access to bivalent vaccinations that even put us in a better position for coverage.
So let's talk a little bit more about that because, sometimes perception becomes reality. And at the beginning of the pandemic, especially because of the myths around the vaccinations and even the myths around COVID-19 itself, there was significant resistance in the African-American community, which we were able to overcome, as you've pointed out. And I'm just wondering if there's a little bit of COVID fatigue that may be preventing people from getting that next booster. Because as you pointed out, the infection rate has dropped. The number of people who without high-risk circumstances or elderly that really get terribly sick and get hospitalized has almost evaporated. Just with the 2 shots. And yes, people are getting COVID even after having gotten the 2 shots and at least 1 booster. To ask them to now do a 4th shot How much is COVID fatigue, as it were, getting in the way of that?
I think your question answers it. There's no doubt. I mean, I'm tired of COVID, aren't you? I'm tired of it,
Certainly.
impacting my life. I just had COVID not too long ago and was double boosted. But that being said, the message is, listen, we're going to be, once we've had our last booster, we're going to quickly go to a year, one booster a year model for COVID. Just like we're in a flu shot model. It's going to go to that model. We'll see multivalent vaccine options that are going to be made available to us as the germ itself stabilizes. But I think we have to be clear. I mean, programs like this and messages from credible messengers like you and I think we still need to let our community know, hey, it's still not over. We want to create an environment where we're safe, not only for us, but for the loved ones that are a little bit more at risk. But there's no doubt, everyone is fatigued, but we still need to be responsible.
So let's talk a bit about medical education.
Sure.
Obviously, you're playing an increasing role in organizations like the NMA, our College of Medicine here, in the Dean's office, etc. Black male enrollment in medical school was down significantly. Last year, it's up 21%. Great numbers, but there have been several people in our community, people like Cato Lorenzen,
Yeah, sure.
And others who at the National Academy of Sciences have really rallied to try to address the situation. Now, I have a theory that the pandemic, with Zoom interviews and black males not having to travel, not having to be in stressful settings to be interviewed, may have increased the number who went to med school. Now, we got to see them persist and graduate, and that will really be a success, and we got to see that trend stay up. What are your thoughts about that trend of that increase of 21% last year?
No, I like it, and because I think that a lot of people are thinking about healthcare differently. A lot of young people are looking at healthcare differently because of the pandemic, and seeing how far-reaching they can have and who they can help because of the pandemic. So I think that I agree that the financial incentives that come along with these Zoom interviews and such puts individuals in a place where they may say, okay, I can do it because I don't have this financial obligation. But I think deep down inside, these black men, these young men, are seeing, listen, I can have an impact in my community because I see what COVID has done. But also, I think that they're seeing some illness in their community. Their baby boomers, which are probably their grandparents, are getting older. So they're watching their grandparents get older, and the baby boomers used to be the biggest group of individuals that we had, right? The grandchildren of those baby boomers are now coming up and watching disease happen in their community. So it's my thought that as they grow up, my daughter's 17 years old, her grandmother's a baby boomer. My daughter wants to be a doctor, right? And from that standpoint, and her own conditions that she wants to work through. But black men in medicine requires a lot more than I think we're doing. I was on the National Academy's workshop with Dr. Lorenzo. I did a workshop myself while I was there at the National Academies. And what I talked about was the mirror of relevancy, right? That mirror of relevancy, that the ability to put in front of young black men, other young black men that are relatively young black men that are physicians, are medical students, that are listening to the same music, that are engaging the same culture. I'm unmistakably hip hop culture. I went to Howard in the 90s, right? When I thought it was the heyday of hip hop, at least on a college campus, right? And you were around during that time. Absolutely. When Biggie came to campus, right? When, Queen Latifah's on campus. When
Heavy D.
Heavy D's on campus. LL on campus. We're talking about hip hop at its height on campus. So the undergrads that were there, the grads that were there, are now the presidents of universities and world-renowned surgeons and forensic pathologists and pathologists, right? We have an obligation, because we still carry culture, we still listen to the same music, we still, engage that. We have a need to show these young people a mirror and say, you don't have to be some version of yourself that is not acceptable. You can be that hip-hop version of yourself and still be intelligent, right? And so it's important for us to create pipelines. I'll end here. We have an organization that I'm on the board of called Young Doctors DC, and they have a presence here at Howard. They're here every summer. Malcolm Woodland is the executive director. He's a Howard grad. And we pour into high school students and give them exposures to what it means to be a physician. We have a 100% high school graduation rate in that program. And all of them may not become doctors, but they will be successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And last question before we close, pathology.
Yeah.
Where is the field of pathology heading? As you look at technology,
Yeah.
how is the field of pathology incorporating things like machine learning, AI? Is there a role for that type of technology in pathology?
Oh, I'm so excited that you asked that question, because that is the future of pathology. Digital pathology is the future. So right now, there's only a handful of institutions that are doing whole slide imaging of the pathology slides. And for those that don't know pathology, we diagnose the disease after a surgeon like you sends us tissue that you've surgically removed from a patient. That comes to the pathologist. We look at it under the slide and give you a diagnosis. Right now we use big microscopes with glass slides. The future is that those slides will be digital, and we'll be looking at monitors. Not only that, but there are right now, really 2 major organ systems, prostate and breast, where artificial intelligence is pattern recognizing tumors and helping the pathologist identify malignancy, and then also doing quality control on those malignancy after the pathologist has read these slides. I know that's a bit in the detail, but there's absolutely room. AI, machine learning. I'm actually talking to some of our own professors in engineering to talk through us applying AI and digital whole slide scanning here at Howard University. So hoping to get that underway.
Oh, excellent. As I close with all my guests, why Howard?
Oh, Howard is a place that puts community first. Howard has a legacy of social justice. Howard has a legacy of ensuring that the least of us have the best opportunities, and advocates for our community. And so, as we say, I bleed blue. This is truly the Mecca. I owe a lot to this university, and will continue to serve it.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. My guest today was Dr. Roger Mitchell, Chair of Pathology at Howard University College of Medicine. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick. Please join me next time on The Journey.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at whut.org. Thank you.